Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Axis. This is the 17th episode. My name is Anagat. I started this podcast whilst also running my company, Intellect, in July 2024, because I got a bit frustrated with a lot of narratives of hopelessness. I found that the world is blissfully full of very, very talented people putting their expertise to the benefit of their fellow man. And I was really curious. Okay, so if everything is terrible, going down the toilet, irredeemably catastrophic, what makes us still wake up in the morning and, go and do our jobs? I find that it's grace and hope that drive people to do these things, but we often don't get a chance to talk about what the specifics of that hope or that grace might be. So in my 17th episode, my guest is Zena Hitz, who is a lecturer at St. John's College in Annapolis. And I'm a huge fangirl of Zena's. So this is a kind of crazy day for me. This is the first time we're actually meeting on Zoom. I think we exchanged a couple of tweets, a couple of emails. And of course, I'm a huge fan of Zena's first book, Lost in Thought, which is in my hand if you're watching us on video. And it's kind of my personal mission to make every human alive read this book. Just, no biggie. Not a very ambitious plan. It's a celebration of having a life of the mind. If you are familiar with Intellect, you know that this is also my life's mission and my life's work. I'm deeply convinced that everybody has an active intellectual life if you let them be. And Zena's book is all about how to let them be and how to maybe connect them with each other. Zena, you're also running a company called, or nonprofit, the Catherine Project, which is a kind of friendly cousin to Intellect. Less of a workplace that Intellect is to many of our hosts, and more a kind of extracurricular gathering space where you subject people to ancient Greek and reading the Bible in Hebrew. Our friend Ari Lam teaches the Hebrew Bible there. And it's just an all-around incredible initiative. We have a lot of overlaps in our membership. Zena, welcome to the Hope Axis. And this is such an honor. I don't know how to explain this to our audience. It's crazy. You're very busy and you're educating people through your own channels, and now you're educating us through ours. So we are very blessed. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be here.
I would like to start by reading up a little piece from a little line from the beginning of Lost in Thought, if you don't mind.
Okay.
This is a part where you're talking about understanding that learning and self-knowledge are not just the fields in academia or subjects of academic life, but they are also something maybe deeper and more core to human beings. You say, learning is a profession, as I found. It is a way of achieving money and status and of supporting the educational machinery already in place. But it begins in hiding, in the inward thoughts of children and adults, in the quiet life of bookworms, in the secret glances at the morning sky on the way to work, or the casual study of birds from the deck chair. The hidden life of learning is its core, what matters about it. Do you want to maybe talk to us a little bit about what it means to be thinking in hiding?
Sure. I think there are examples in which the hidden life of learning, which was actually the title I wanted for the book, Between You and Me. But the editor waged psychological warfare on me until I the one that he chose. But there's a way in which there are cases where it's a real hiding, and there are cases where it's more like a metaphor, an image for something. A couple examples of it actually being hidden. So prisoners are my favorite examples. So that we have stories, and I'm sure there are more stories that we don't know about, of people who, for instance, remain. There's Irina Dumitrescu, the literary critic.
She was just on the podcast before you. She was my guest beforehand. Yeah.
She helped me a lot because she has this piece on Romanian political prisoners and what they did in prison, and they tapped poetry and Morse code through the walls. They taught each other languages silently with knots on string to symbolize letters. There was a Romanian officer in Siberia who wrote out poems he'd memorized in school with ink made from blackberries. So these are things which are happening in secret, in hiding. Now the stories got out, fortunately for us, so that we can see something that might be going on all the time. So there could be anyone in prison anywhere who could be working at math problems or writing poetry or using their mind in some way that's not visible to us. The other example, which was the one I first started writing about because it has a kind of clarity to it. There's this French art film called The Hedgehog. It's a film version of a novel by Muriel Barbary, The Elegance of the Hedgehog. And the central character is the concierge at a bourgeois Paris apartment building. And so she's working class. All the inmates are quite wealthy. And she's treated badly. You know, she gives them their mail and she does the cleaning. And she kind of puts up a front of being a cranky, dumb, stereotype of working class person. And she has a secret life behind her kitchen, she has a door. And behind the door, the hidden door, is a room full of books where she goes to read. So the hiding there is, in these cases, it's symbolizing an inner life, right? So you don't need actual walls. You don't need an actual secret room. You don't need to be in prison. But your thinking is a space that belongs to you. And it's a place where you can find activity and meaning that's independent from what you're getting from your social world. So in these cases, with these people, the prisoners or working class people, and there are many, many, many stories of the intellectual lives of working class people, it's very, very common. We never think about it, but it's real. And they're treated badly in their environments. They may be diminished, mistreated, impoverished in various ways. But there's something within them that's not diminished in the midst of that. So that's the hidden thing. It's withdrawn from the world in a certain way, and it's only visible if someone chooses to share it. And that's not to say that somehow, I think there are people who've misunderstood my emphasis in this, and they think that, she thinks the life of the mind is just something that belongs to individuals in closets. I don't think that. So life of the mind is always in some sense connected.
At all in the book. No. That's a misreading.
Yeah, exactly. You're always in the life of the mind. You're always connecting with people who have thought before. And people who are thinking. The
Hedgehog is a love story, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Hedgehog is a love story.
Exactly. Place. She finds somebody else who has the same inner world, the same kind of reading nook. And that's a better way to connect with another individual than through any superficial or social.
Exactly. It's non-competitive, right? It's something cooperative. And also even when she's in her room, she's reading books, and there are people in the books, real people, real authors. One of the things that a book can do is can keep someone alive who has been dead for many years. And that's not being sentimental or metaphorical. Their thinking, which is a life activity, is recorded in the book, and you can engage with it. You wouldn't engage with it in the same way. You engage differently with different authors, with different people. So you're also, even in that sense, connecting with other people. So learning is always collective, but it does involve, in these cases, withdrawal from a kind of the world of competition, the world of, the world where people are striving for money and power and status, and you could be on the losing end of it. But there's this space that's available to you that you can always go to.
You have you have a lot of dichotomies in the book, right? So there is the hiding and the public, the atheist or godless world of humans, the religious life, the kind of temptations of social butterflies versus the contemplative, whether that's, watching an animal for years, as Baker did, or whether it's somebody, communing with authors long gone, empty and fulfilled, unhappy, happy, episteme, doxa, like you have all these pairs. And one of my favorite sections about the book that goes back to, Malcolm X studying in prison, that goes back to the concierge hiding in her little reading nook in this bougie apartment building in Paris. You said inmates versus inhabitants. I love that. You by Freud just called the the
I
rest
did.
of this book.
Oh, very good. I didn't mean to do that. That's very
It's
good.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
They are inmates of their bougie Parisian apartment building. And there's a section where you talk about the world. I just did an interintellect salon with Peter Thiel on Girard, and I went and read some of his takes, Girard's takes on metanoia, and how Girard thought that even if actual religious conversion is not there for the Acer, as it was for Dostoevsky say, there is still a metanoia, and Proust is the ultimate example, who is fully, living in this copy of a copy world of the different sides of different families who are all the same people, and no actual differentiation matters in the competition, right? Because it's just the same goal. Whereas when Proust has his conversion experience, he's converting to literature basically, but has a similar seclusion effect on him as a religious conversion. And he becomes a monk, basically. He never again reaches out. There's this beautiful moment in Girard where he talks about how André Gide, who had known Proust in his externalized life of social butterfly, can't get himself to read the manuscript of À la Recherche because he knew the guy in the old life, right? It's very biblical, right? He be a prophet at home. And so as I was reading the book, I was like, oh my God, I have to ask Zena about the world. In dichotomies, what is the world? What is this place where we lose ourselves and we become these nondescript, status-driven, unhappy creatures? What is the life of the mind, the antithesis to, in your analysis?
That's such a good question. And, I wrote the book at this point a while ago. The time gets longer and longer all the time. And I never, it's not like I had a worked out theory. I did the thinking about it that I did at the time, and I wrote it out for other people to continue their thinking. So I'm not sure, I've rethought some things, and I'm sure I will rethink others. But let me just start where I started then and see where we get.
Okay. Because
the thought was, and it was, I think, originally meant to be a biblical notion of the world. So in the Gospel of John, John especially uses this notion of the world where it's a realm of competition and strife. So like when you say Jesus comes into the world, or he says in the Last Supper discourses, you are not of the world, I am not of the world, and this is where the origin of the Christian slogan that, we are in the world but not of the world. And, people hear that and they think, oh, these Christians, they hate real life, and they want to like soar away into fantasy land where everything's perfect. And that isn't what it's meant to be. So the world is meant to be a way of abstracting out the parts of life that are imprisoning, where we can be trapped our whole lives. So let's just let me just switch over to St. Augustine for a second. So Augustine says in the Confessions, right, that our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Our hearts are restless till they rest in God. That's a version of a Socratic principle, which is really what we want is wisdom. I don't know if you've talked to Agnes Callard yet about her new book, but this is something she's interested in, right? So people are doing all kinds of things, but what they really want is wisdom. They're trying to make money. What they really want is wisdom. They're trying to rule the world like Alcibiades. Really what they want is wisdom. So there's this desire that you actually really have. There's a life that you could live in some sense that will really satisfy you. And you're not living it. You can spend your whole life not living it. You can be born, grow up, mature, decline, and die without ever doing the thing that would really fulfill you. And that's the world. Okay, so whatever keeps you in that space is the world. So I call it in the book the realm of competition, the sort of locus of struggles for power and status. But and that doesn't mean that money or power or status are bad in themselves or something. I mean, the funny thing, right? I wrote this book and then I made some money and I got some power and some status from it. Okay, so that's very paradoxical. On the other hand, I can use that money and power and status for something that I care about, namely, helping people to live more authentic lives where they learn better and stuff like that. Or I can just let it rest on me and
buy shoes. Yeah.
get pulled back into the world and lose whatever window I had out of it that I used to have. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic. But the point is that another way I've thought about it, okay, so there's the realm of locus of struggle of power, money, status. Another way of thinking about it is it's autopilot. And I think middle-class people are especially prone to this. You grow up, you're put under pressure because you've got to get into college. And these days in the US, it's younger and younger. So you're 8 years old and you're got to think about getting into the best high school. So anyway, so you're on this track and everything you do is...
Woody Allen has this jokey short story about like the unborn child already being placed in the best kindergarten. And he wrote it in the 70s, right? And even then, like, they haven't even conceived this child yet. And it already has a spot in the best Manhattan nursery.
Exactly. So there's a kind of a track that you can be born into and move along. And it could take you to the end of your life. And you could never really reflect on whether what you were doing was what you really wanted to do, whether it was really satisfying to you, whether the values that you'd been trained into were the right values or not. So getting off of autopilot is another way of escaping the world in some way. So those are, I think I just gave 3 or 4 or 5 different ways of thinking about it. And maybe none of them is quite right, but at least I hope it at least gives a sense of how I'm thinking about it.
I'd love to see, I mean, obviously Lost in Thought, and I don't know if this was your original intention or as you worked with the editors. Obviously, the book came out during COVID. Before we started recording this podcast, we were joking how, seclusion was not a problem during COVID. You didn't have to really like aggressively convince people to stay at home and not do anything because that was the only thing to be done. But it's beautiful how you have a religious text, a literary text, a kind of memoir, but also self-help book, if I really want to kind of force the genre apart. Do you have people coming up to you and asking you, how do I know what I want?
I definitely get a lot of requests for advice for people who, especially from people who are in situations similar to the things that I described myself having gone through in the book. So graduate students, very, very common for them to reach out to me and to ask for advice. I have a meeting, I think later this week or maybe next week with such a student. So
what do you say?
Well, I do what anyone would do, which is you try to figure out what's really going on in the person, because there's not a right answer, right? It's not like going to grad school is bad. Don't do it. It's not like you should definitely quit academia immediately. Let me tell you why. Because it's like the money and status. There's nothing, most things aren't really good or bad in themselves. It's what you do with them. And what are you bringing to it? And what are you getting out of it? And what's really driving you? And sometimes you have to change your circumstances to change your values. And what happened in COVID, I think, is a great example where no one changed their circumstances willingly, but suddenly you're stuck in these circumstances where nothing's the same. And you have to really ask yourself what you're doing and why.
Do you think COVID caused any kind of metanoia in people?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So many.
Tell me.
Well, I just hear from people all the time who quit their jobs. My little brother was always interested in food and the food business. He was going to run a restaurant, and he was well placed to do that. And during COVID, he was just like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So now he makes things instead. but I know tons and tons of, like, it's one of the things that we saw, it was so, happened so at such a huge scale that you could see it in statistics, where suddenly everyone's retiring, everyone's changing jobs. Like, there was that long period when there was no one doing service work. There was no one working in hospitals because it got to the point where it was no longer rewarding for them. So I think that was a huge externally imposed metanoia generator. COVID
as metanoia generator. I love this.
And so, but you can't count on those things. And that's why I think it's worthwhile. I was very grateful. I spent 3 years in a monastery, as you know. That was very important for me. I needed to be completely removed from the rest of my life and supported and, taken care of and loved. Like, it wasn't like I was being kept in a prison or something. It was a very nice place, very good place. And then I could kind of start to see clearly. So I think people usually need to seek out something like that. And the best time is when you're young. Spend a year doing service work, spend a year in the Peace Corps, spend a year traveling.
But like Leonard, when you're 65 and you join a Zen monastery and become a cook.
Exactly.
That's where your questions.
It could be any age. But most people, what happens to many people is they get, into a variety of commitments, and so they feel the crisis, but their options are more limited. If you've got a bunch of kids at home and aging parents to take care of, and you've got to keep your income, you can't just take a few years and go do something else. But
some people do, like Larissa McFarker's book, Strangers Drowning, is about these extreme people who leave the baby at home and go and, I don't know, vaccinate orphans in Central Africa. And then also kind of in the Bernard Williams sense, what is the opinion on this from the baby left at home?
Exactly. No, that's true. And I was actually thinking about this couple recently, because they spent most of their life serving migrants at the border in Houston. And they were Catholics. They were involved in a movement called the Catholic Worker, the Zwicks, a married couple. Anyway, they had a couple of kids, and they felt this call to go to El Salvador and live with the poorest people in El Salvador. They took the whole family. They just took the whole family to El Salvador. I don't know how happy the kids were about it in retrospect. It'd be interesting to know. But that, these people were like, look, this is what we've got to do. And then they spent the rest of their life taking care of migrants in Houston. So there are people like that. But I think it's best to kind of build it in when you're young.
And also, every time I revisit the book, it says something different to me, depending on where I am in my life. And this time around, I was reflecting on kind of short-term selfishness versus long-term selfishness. I feel that our world either feels extremely ego bruising, you're a cog in the machine, you're just one account on Twitter, you're, a toy of the elements that you have no control of. But sometimes you also feel extremely selfish and overserved. And, if I hear self-care one more time, I'm going to scream into a pillow. We're supposed to care for each other, etc., etc. But there is something around, I often meditate on this. Like, do we have some kind of ethical duty to be happy in a spiritual sense? Because if we're not, we will make other people extremely miserable. So actually taking some time off, figuring out how you can exist in a way that you're aligned with yourself deeply is the greatest service. First of all, you will be a much better server of everybody else's need, because you will not hate happy people or people who are made happy by your service because of your unhappiness. There seems to be something where, if we allow this person to, take their kids to a less comfortable place for a couple of years, but then in exchange, give this family long-term ethical happiness, that maybe that's good in itself, or that's better. Do you ever wonder about this? I
think about things quite differently. So I think the danger in the way you're talking is that it takes the form of a classic rationalization. So, there's many people who their marriage isn't going great, and they got a few kids, and they kind of know that the divorce is going to be bad for the kids, but they're like, oh, but it'll matter to them that I'll be happy, and the evidence shows that that's actually just not the case. It never makes your children. It never makes your children happy. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do, but it's never.
Well, yeah, but that's not what I meant. To me, that seems very violent. What I mean is more that if, say, the spouse needs to spend more time just in his room or her room thinking about stuff, even though they will not be able to do some small task for a while, but in exchange, they will find some kind of inner peace that in the long term is better for people. It
can be. I still think you're thinking differently than I would. So let me just try to explain better how I think, because you're still using a bit of a utilitarian calculus. So, this is worth this. And I don't think that always happens. So I don't know whether the Zwicks, for instance, let's assume their kids were quite unhappy. I hope they're not listening. It'd be very awkward to have someone talk about your family.
They're fine. They're fine. Yeah.
Anyway, suppose that it really was damaging to them to spend their childhoods this way. Is it somehow worth it? I don't know. Was it wrong? Not necessarily. So there are these quite complicated situations, and I think the reason why I feel that way is I don't think that morality has the form of calculation. I don't think it's at all algorithmic. I think it's very, very, it's the kind of thing that only humans can do, because it involves, and this is something I do try to say in the book, and in fact, I think it's said clearly that I say it there, then sometimes I say it now, but it's about the end. The ethics and morality are all about the end for which you live, like the ultimate end, your ultimate orientation. And that is a form of happiness. So the basic idea that somehow your fulfillment and your moral duty are totally at odds with each other is BS. Like what your well-being is the standard for morality. Now, what your well-being is might be pretty complicated. I mean, there's this wonderful passage in Thomas Aquinas where he talks about how Christ on the cross is the image of the happy man. You're like, what? Because he's fulfilling all of the virtues. He's doing the thing that he's meant to do in the best way possible. So it doesn't mean that happiness isn't being free of pain. It's being fulfilled in the deepest sense. So all to say, for me, it's all about the choice of the final end and being in a situation where you can choose it, where you can discern it, and then the rest of your life should be ordered in some way towards that. And that is, on the one hand, flexible enough that you're not maximizing your final end, right? So suppose my final end is wisdom. It doesn't mean that everything else I do is a waste of time unless I can explain exactly how it contributes to wisdom. Like wisdom is the outcome and like everything's got to serve it. It doesn't mean that. I could do things that didn't have much to do with wisdom so long as they didn't interfere, right? Or so long as they bore in some way on it. So I think that, but it also, so it permits that kind of flexibility, but it also permits real forms of awkwardness, like these people who have these intense urges to serve the poor in ways that might really be hard on their kids. And, it's not obvious what you say about that. It might mean for some person that it's just not the right thing to do. Like they're not called to go to El Salvador because they have kids and they should look after them. But there are people.
Or Jesus choosing not to get crucified and fulfill his goal because it makes his mom cry in the short term, right?
Something like that, right? Exactly. There might be something like that going on. And it's so, every human life is so particular and so fine-grained that it can't be transferred over So that's why I don't tell, when people reach out to me and they're like, I'm in grad school and I'm not sure what I really want to do, and I feel like I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, I don't say, well, you should do what I did. Go to a monastery for 3 years and then come back and teach at St. John's. That's not necessarily the right thing. Maybe they should stay where they are. It's so particular. It's so fine-grained and it's so individual. It's like living your life is like gardening. It's not like building something from scratch. Things have lives of their own, and you can only intervene in certain ways. And a lot of what happens is just trying to manage what's there in the best way possible. I don't know. I feel like I'm going on and on without necessarily getting there. But
I think that would be the most useful thing to say to somebody who basically asks you, should I blow up my entire life, sow the earth, get rid of the garden, and see what happens? And also to give that complete responsibility to somebody from scratch.
Right.
Is a grad student necessarily ready for that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, even in your story, and I really would love to talk about it in a moment, you also have a kind of returning to your alma mater at the end. So it's not really razoring out everything. It's taking a step back and looking at it to kind of go back to Proust just through new eyes. The same thing.
Right. Exactly. So for me, there were, I didn't say this in the book. I just remembered this and said sorry to reuse material on another podcast recently, but there are two other women who are PhDs in philosophy at the same community I was in, Madonna House. And they were sure that they were called to give it up completely. Whereas to me, it was very clear I had to give it up for a time, and then I had to come back and do more of it. And it is definitely a gardening type of thing. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this thing? Like this redwood tree that's coming out of my head. Am I really supposed to just go live as if it's not there? Or let it affect this world that's very unlike it in a certain way? And it became clear that it wasn't the case for me, that what I needed to do was to just reshape my life with the mind so that it was more, so that service was at the core of it, teaching was at the core of it. And I guess since we're talking about hope, I think that that's honestly the turn that was the way I would describe the turn that I went through was turning my gifts towards service rather than towards advancement on the outside grid, the publications, the status, stuff like that.
Talk about finding religion and kind of backing out of academia in your book as a gradual process. But I'm always so curious, like, what was the last straw? Like, what was the last thing to snap? That, because as you were talking about rationalization, and when we try to like decide, ways to act, we look at authenticity, we look at what harm this would short-term cause to other people. Like, it's a complicated matrix, and there are often no perfect decisions. Like something will be unpleasant, at least for a little bit. And you talk about an extended period of unpleasantness and unhappiness, right? You have a spiritual crisis, you have moral unhappiness.
Yeah.
You're doing everything right. You're following the cultural script. To me, that sounds like the world that we just discussed.
Yeah.
You want to maybe speak to that a little bit? Like, where were you in life? What was going on? And what was the last moment when you thought, this is it, I'm out? Mic'd off.
Yeah. So it started when I was in graduate school. And when the World Trade Center was bombed, and I was living quite near there, and my family living in the city, so it was very dramatic. For those of you who are alive and adult, then you remember it was very, very shocking. And that was another case.
Talk about a world event, right? Like,
and also talk about a metanoia generator. I think many, many, many people after that turned towards service from whatever else they were doing. So I was very unsettled. I didn't want to be an academic anymore. I wanted to do something that was connected in a concrete way with people's suffering, with alleviating people's suffering. And that was a desire I had. Okay. So this is also something I think people sometimes miss about morality. It's like serving people is something that you want. It's something that's fulfilling. We talk about it as if it's a drag, and sometimes it is. And of course, like you need, it's got to be the right kind of thing and done the right kind of way. And you can't just flatten yourself. You're not like a raw materials for the use of others. You have your own integrity. You have to be loved too and taken care of. But the truth is that serving people is very, very fulfilling. And the people who have fulfilling lives tend to be people who serve other people, and who get rewarded for it. So not like service workers, fast food workers who, they serve other people, but they get treated like garbage. That's not going to work as well. Okay. So sorry, that was a bit of a digression, but so I was in graduate school. I had this crisis, and what I really wanted to do was to help people, serve people. But I was on this completely different track that didn't feel like it had anything to do with that. It was being a philosophy professor. And I was in a very elite program. I was very successful. So it was very hard to see how to give it up. So, and I kept trying one thing and then another. So I thought, I'll go into like human rights work. And I was like, oh, no, I hate this. No, I hate this. Or like, I'll join the CIA. Well, no, I don't think I could ever kill anyone or anything like that. It's not right. So, I stayed, you're laughing at me, but it's true. So then I was like, okay, I'll stay on for a bit longer. So, and it ended up being a period of about 10 years, where in the middle of that, early on in that time, I became Catholic. So I underwent a conversion. And then that sort of started to shape the way I was thinking about it. So I started doing Catholic forms of service. And then I also had this other framework for thinking about what's going on, which is, okay, well, Catholics have this thing called discerning a vocation. You're called by God to do something, some particular kind of service. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's why I'm so unhappy. But I kept trying things. I worked in a soup kitchen. I volunteered with refugees. I volunteered in a hospice. I ran a jail ministry for a while. I taught philosophy in prison. I visited all these communities.
And you were unhappy.
Well, yeah, I was looking.
What was the unhappiness like? Like you couldn't pray, you couldn't be alone with your thoughts, you couldn't sleep, you slept too much. Like, how did you?
I'm
not even sure if they are happy or not.
I wanted. It was. I hated my work. I hated my job, and the job was all I had. I was single. I didn't have a family. I was living far from my parents. And the job was sometimes satisfying. I would have a few students in every class who I felt like I was really teaching. But they were not. That was not most of what I was doing. And then I was writing these papers, which I enjoyed. But somehow it didn't seem like the purpose of my life was to write philosophy articles. So I was dedicating a huge amount of time and energy towards something that was not satisfying me. That's what the unhappiness was.
I love this speech in your book when you're teaching these giant auditoriums full of young people, Aristotle and Plato. And, if it was a montage to music, everybody would think, oh, Zena is so happy. She's living the best life. She wanted to be a philosophy professor. And look, and you're like, I'm not teaching these kids anything. This is not a small group. This is not a conversation. It's anonymous. Yeah. It's churning out these papers that I think these days AI will make even more obsolete. Like nobody will want to do these things. And you're ahead of your time, basically realizing.
Well, no, I think
yes,
it's true. This is a cliche about AI. This is all, of course, before AI, but it was not before internet plagiarism, which is really the.
I went to school when Wikipedia started, so I was there. I was there.
When I was a college student, like you had to go, if you wanted to plagiarize, you had to go to the library and copy something out. And if you did that, you probably would learn something, honestly. I mean, it was cheating, but you'd learn something. But no, it was copy and paste plagiarism that was the AI version of that time.
But then the thin line, what is that plagiarism? Is that research?
No, it's truthfully, it's not that thin. But the problem is that I think I realized, I don't know if I articulated it until more recently, but that it was hard to see the system was making this what it was. They were gaming something that could be gamed, and what you wanted was a type of education that couldn't be gamed. So if it's a small class and you're very visible to your teacher, and like piano, like you can't have, you know, the internet play the piano for your piano teacher for you, right? You've got to do it, you know.
I love this example. Can I plagiarize this? No,
Yes.
it's going to be Creative Commons. I'm going to attribute it to you. But
No. You don't have to decide it. That's not. But like literally, you're not. You can't have AI do your karate for you. Like, oh, I practiced all week, and then like, what are you gonna do? Like, put it like a Zena
punch in the face. That's what's going to.
And you're like, oh yeah, see how I did that? Oh, look at the video. No, not what I'm doing. Look at the video. I mean, so it's real learning. Real learning can't be gamed. Real learning is moving from where you really are to someplace that it's really different. And so the problem was that those large classrooms were set up to be gamed. And first it was internet plagiarism, which we could kind of handle with software. And now it's AI, which we can't really handle with software. And honestly, I think the whole thing is toast. I mean, there's just anything that can be gamed like that. It's not going to be an educational system. We're going to have to rethink the whole thing. Anyway, that's beside the point. So what was unhappy with that?
You have this realization that you're talking to the wall, basically, in some weird way.
Well, mind you, I don't want to exaggerate, because I always had some students who are really learning. It just wasn't what the whole thing was for. The whole thing was for this kind of like rubber stamping. They turn in things that minimally meet the assignment, and I give them the minimally acceptable grade, and then we're all done, transaction finished. And so that was what made me so unhappy. So I kept trying things. I started taking classes in theology. I started studying the Bible. I thought maybe I could be, so I was trying to find ways to reconcile the two things. Like maybe I could be a Bible scholar. Maybe it'd be kind of like serving God, but also kind of academic. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I need to be at a Catholic institution.
You're in your rationalization phase.
And then so I was just trying everything, every way I could find. Maybe there'd be some Catholic worker house that works for the poor that really wants a philosopher in residence, you know, anything to reconcile these two things. And I couldn't find anything. And I looked at all of these religious communities. I was like, there's got to be a community of nuns where they study and think. No, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. So
you went to Switzerland, right? In search of this, like,
there are these other women
celebrating the intellectual life. I mean, like the Jesuits in the 1600s, right? This used to be normal.
Well, for men it still is. It's just it's for women and it's, I think, a moment that will pass, but it's nonetheless been real for some time. So I mean, in early 20th century, you had women's college, or mid 20th century, and women's colleges taught by nuns who were very well educated, and you know that would have been the life for me. But I wasn't born in the right time, or in the Middle Ages. You know, you had Hildegard von Bingen, like figuring stuff out. But that just wasn't a reality at the time I was looking. So finally, I had to make a choice. That was the last straw. Was when I ran through every list. I followed every recommendation everyone gave me, every rumor I'd heard, and I was exhausted. And I knew I just had to make a choice. So once I had to make the choice, it was clear that I had to at least spend some time just not in academia anymore. And that was the last straw. It was, in a way, totally contingent. It was exhaustion. In another way, it was I had chased down every lead I'd gotten for a way to reconcile these things, and I couldn't do it.
And you write about it, and yet people go for your advice. You write about how there's no advice.
I know. I think people
guys lost in this case as well.
People get the idea that I'm a good person to talk to, so they want to talk to me. I don't know what to do about it. It's just the way it is. I don't mind. I'm very honored.
What was the most striking thing to you after you came back from your life of seclusion? And people, if they want to read about these 3 years that you spent in Ontario, in this community, it's so beautifully written, and it's only strange in today's world. Right? It used to be a thing that people actually did when they widowed or when they came back from the Crusades. Like, it was okay to kind of go into hiding for a little bit and kind of rearrange yourself because you are a new person now. And how could you do it whilst actively engaged in the world? But it seems like today, unless it's accompanied by, extensive polyamorous psychedelic staking, people think it's a weird thing to kind of leave normalcy behind. When you came back and you went back to where you were educated, how was it different, knowing what you then knew?
It was very, very delightful. I mean, it was a very happy, it was kind of the honeymoon period. Well, for one thing, coming back, I knew, because when I was in the monastery, part of what happens is you end up spending a lot of time, especially at the beginning, thinking back on your life. And so thinking back on my life, I was like, oh my gosh, that college really helped me. It was a very good place. That really helped me become the person who I became. So coming back, I knew that this was a good place for people to be, and that keeping it alive and keeping it going and serving it was totally worth doing. So I think that's a very natural thing that I think, because we have so many possibilities, we middle-class people in the West, we don't realize how natural it is to actually just find a way to give back whatever good things you've received as a person. Again, like, it's very natural, and it's very fulfilling. And most people do it when they have kids in some way or other, right? But this was a way that I could just, here are people that are like who I used to be, and I'm going to try to do for them what my teachers did for me. And it was wonderful. And it was a much better environment for teaching and learning than the other jobs were. And again, it was like, it's this thing about service where from the outside, you're like, oh, what a drag. Where will I'll disappear. Like, oh, to spend my whole life. Because it's honestly this job that I'm at work right now, actually. This is one of our meeting rooms. It can be 60, 70 hours a week. It's very, very demanding. We teach in the evenings. We have huge readings. We meet with students all the time. It's very, very demanding and very, very busy, and it eats up a lot of other things. But the truth is that it's also intensely meaningful, and you see the impact that you have on people, and you see that it's good. And you also, it's not, because you're part of a community, it's not an ego thing. Like, I'm myself, I am one among a number of faculty members, and I bring to my class something distinctive, and each of them does the same thing. And it's the whole community that does the work, not any one of us. So on the one hand, you're kind of shoulder to the wheel, putting everything you have into it. On the other hand, you're not alone in doing it. And that's just a picture of what good work is. It's an intense level. Yeah. So I'm an intense person. So I like it. Yeah. There are people for whom it's too intense. And they should do something different.
Yeah. You talk beautifully about service, but the other side of it, which, if I understand your thought here correctly, you think that other thing is a kind of prerequisite or a natural accompaniment, which is contemplation. That that it's a seesaw, right? And to find that person in yourself who craves and who is good at this act of service, you have to have this inner dialogue, whether just with yourself or with God or with authors. Do you want to maybe speak to the contemplative life a little bit? And how does it relate to religious life? It's not, you don't have to be religious to have a contemplative life, but it seems like with religion, it comes with maybe a little more scaffolding or a more concrete set of rules than if you just go up to any atheist and say, hey, here's a book, go and contemplate.
Well, I think that the way that I would think about it, theologically would be to say that contemplation is a natural good. It's a good for every human being because they're human beings. It doesn't require an act of faith or a relationship with a supernatural being in a direct way. But so there's all kinds of versions of that available to people, and we know that because it comes from ancient Greece. It appears in ancient Greece in a very clear way. And ancient Greece is a pagan culture. It doesn't have contact with Judaism or with Christianity. And it's long before Islam. So we know that this ideal of contemplation that someone like Socrates practiced is not necessarily connected to any particular religion, really. But I suppose I'd say something like religion, or at least for me, the Catholic faith is a kind of fulfillment of it. It provides other options. So, for instance, prayer is in a way much more accessible than thinking. Now, I think thinking is a lot more accessible than people think it is, and I think a lot more people do thinking and contemplation than believe they're doing it. But even so, prayer is something virtually anyone can do. I mean, really anyone can do. All you have to do is want to do it. Whereas thinking requires some training, it requires some education of some kind, even self-education. So that's one way of putting it. I feel like I lost track. There was a question I wanted to answer, and I lost track of it.
Yeah, whether religion gives a kind of scaffolding to contemplation.
Right. Well, and then the other question was about service.
I think you kind of answered it, but I love how you approach each question from a variety of different angles. Please go.
Okay, but you were also asking about contemplation and service, which I wanted to say
like that kind of as a complement to it.
So and this is a specific spirituality with which I was trained in the community I was in. So one of the priests there said, for us, contemplation is for the sake of engagement. So that's not true in every spirituality. So like the Dominicans, for instance, or Thomas Aquinas, contemplation is the end. There's another image. And as you're contemplating, it kind of overflows. There's a kind of excess to it, which spills out and helps other people. So service is kind of the light that contemplation sheds, or something like that.
I mean, you even have Mary and Martha, right? Like you even have a story about it.
There's a story about it. But my particular way of thinking about it is a little different. So it is more, in order to really connect with others, in order to really serve others, you have to have this inner core that you're drawing from. And that probably has to do with what you were mentioning earlier, where in the hedgehog, where it's a love story, where the withdrawal is...
There's no real love. I mean, I think when people are unsure in a moment who they are, they do choose the wrong job and the wrong person, and then feel like, oh my God, I was losing myself. And what I think is, no, you lost yourself first, and then got yourself into this situation.
Well, it's also, one thing that anyone in any kind of service work is aware of is the danger of denying every need that you personally have for the sake of this. So it's some kind of extreme burnout where, you've got to serve these other people, and so you totally neglect yourself, and it's not sustainable, and you collapse. So part of what it is, it's not just a energy management thing. It's more like the structure of your life. Because as I've been trying to say, like, morality and happiness are not opposed. Like, happiness understood as flourishing or well-being or being the person you should be is the standard. So you have to be flourishing for that service to be worthwhile. That doesn't mean you have to enjoy every second of it. Of course, it's going to be a drag sometimes. But your life has to be, on the whole, good. That's a basic.
This is what I was trying to explain in my very
you can't you can't sacrifice the goodness of your life for other people. That doesn't make any sense.
It's not your Christian duty. It's not your duty as a Jew,
No.
or as a Muslim. Nobody asks you to do this.
No. And part of what, what happens, there are extreme cases. Okay. So, let's say there's a really bad plague, like a really bad one, not COVID, but like
the bubonic
plague.
Yeah.
Maybe I should take care. Serving other people is going to involve risking getting sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe I've got to do that. And then I think I need the theological.
Yeah.
Then I need to say, God permitted the plague. He's not going to let me down. I've got to do the right thing. Somehow it's going to be fulfilling, and I don't know how yet. That's theology. That's not something you can get, I don't think, at the natural level. I think at the natural level you could be, and maybe even with religion, you could say, you know what, I'm going to go someplace where there isn't any plague and do my work because I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, you need the fortification there. I think it's not something that will arise at the base human level instinct, and it's not supposed to, right?
No.
The base human instinct is there just to keep you alive, and it's very useful in 99.9% of the cases. And then there is the bubonic plague, and it's an exception, and you need a difference. And I mean, the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is full of these stories, right? Of different plagues. I mean, the plagues, right? Like there is what to do in unprecedented times. And it's not just sending emails that start with, these are unprecedented times. We have a couple of minutes left, and we will talk privately because I want to ask you about leisure versus laziness. I'm surrounded by productivity boys on Twitter. I'm so curious what questions they might have about you telling people to slow down and basically for a moment, just like go into your room and be with yourself. But the one thing that I really would like to cover is, I think one of our first conversations, I shared with you that I basically broke up with somebody because of lost in thought.
I don't think you did tell me that, no.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
And it was the right thing to do.
It was for my greater good. I can vouch for that. I was reading about the end goal, highest good part, and I just looked up from the book and realized that my highest good and this person's highest good are very different, and they will never be reconciled, and that's fine. But ever since then, I have been thinking about this, and people talk about cost functions and the driving eros of a person, and you talk about the end goal and the highest good. And if I was your grad student, and I was 25, I would go to you and ask you to help me figure out what mine is. I find that I was just talking about this with some people earlier today, that I often feel that you are right about most things, and that there are people who are wrong about most things, and that greatly interest me. And the one thing where I see a pattern is that the people who are correct in their assessments and the people who are as close to the highest good that they can, or the understanding their highest good as you can be at that age, went through a lot of really difficult periods. Like the price is super high. So if somebody is just, looking at the precipice that they have to somehow fall into and climb out of because they don't know what their highest good is, what should they do? Is there any way to soften that blow? Any way we can help each other? Or it's just like, you have to climb there, my child. Whatever happens, there's, nobody's exempt. Well, how are you feeling about it? Am I being too utilitarian again?
No. I think what you're saying is right. I think you need support. You need people who have done something similar. You need guides and helpers and mentors, which I had plenty of. So I jumped off this cliff, while these people were saying like, yes, I jumped off a cliff once, and it was very hard and it was all...
It hurts, but it's going to be good somehow,
And then I'm at the bottom of the canyon and other people are there and they're like, yes, I fell off a cliff once and it's very hard, but it's going to be worth it. And to me, don't get me wrong, when I heard those things, I was just like, yeah, the F right. this doesn't feel like it's going to get better. This is terrible. Like there were parts of it that were really intense suffering. But because at some bottom level, I trusted these people because they seemed happy. So you need models, real flesh and blood models for people who have been through it and can do it. And you need to check in with them because otherwise, you're right. I mean, if the pain is too serious, you might not be able to tolerate it. And then again, it's like life is big. It's not like you've ruined everything by not jumping off that particular cliff. I mean, I think that it all evens out. You know, it's not like, I mean, I think I took on voluntarily a chunk of suffering for a time to save myself a lot later. I mean, now I'm the utilitarian. Listen to me. But I think it's true.
Voice, right?
I mean, I was unhappy with my life, and it was getting worse. And if I had gone back to it, it might have been a little bit of relief for a while, but then it would have come back again. So there's a way in which you're just delaying. You know, you're delaying the suffering until another time. And there are other people. I mean, you can also, there's various psychological dynamics. You can deaden yourself to the pain. You can rationalize your way out of the pain. You can do all kinds of things. So, but I do think that it's finding guides and mentors, and really maybe don't do it until you find them, because you might not be able to do it without them. You need other people.
And to have this, I mean, you mentioned like doing these things that I can imagine to like the least charitable observer would seem like a flaky young woman, you know, now she's doing human rights. Now she doesn't like that. Now she's in a soup kitchen. Like
I had this brutal review on Goodreads. It's like that. It's like, oh, well, this lady was sure privileged. Look, she did that.
Shopping around.
Exactly. No, but for instance,
it's fine. Like, be judged. It's okay. Like, how would you?
Yeah, it's yourself? Fine. I most of the feedback I get is positive. But you know, I knew a woman, for instance, over this time when I was making this decision. She belonged to Madonna House, the community I lived in. She had been a seamstress in New York, a costumer, and working at a very, very high level. So working for Woody Allen, working for dance companies that were on world tours, very, very high level, successful costumer, and connected with the
job.
I know, incredible job. And so connected with the arts in a way that was totally exciting. And she gave it up and joined this community, you know. And so I knew that she'd done, and she was happy. Very, very happy person. So I knew that people like that had done it and it had worked. So, but you have to see that with your own eyes, because if I just tell you the story, you're not going to believe it. But it's true. There are people like this. So you have to find those people who are, you have to look for happy people, because they're not that easy to find, I don't think.
Yeah. I sometimes have this.
What they do.
Have this question to myself when I meet somebody new, whether I could tell if they have already been broken and had to put themselves together, because it's a very different being.
Okay.
And that, goes for everything,
Yeah.
One of my close friends, she had her first heart surgery when she was 3 months old and has been living with the pain. Like, it's a person who has had to put herself physically back together. There are who had to do it spiritually, personally, familially, intellectually, in terms of regimes, because they fled a regime where they were taught how the world works, and then it turns out, no.
Yeah. That's right.
People who found out they were living in a lie, because somebody that they were living with had been lying to them. And I'm not quite sure, but I think I do have a good detector. Do you ever sense this, that somebody has been through the precipice or not yet?
I know what you're talking about, and I think I agree that it's different for different people. I have found myself to be wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
I've stopped. I think I may have trained myself out of doing it, because
there's no way to tell.
Well, I think, this person, they really haven't gone through it. And then they tell you a piece of their story and you're like, what?
Wow. What's happened? Yeah.
Or it can go the other way too. People feel wise, but in fact, people press too hard on it. So people are very. The older I get, the more I realize how complicated and rich people are. It's harder to see them from the outside than I think. But
I love
I
this.
recognize what you're talking about. I definitely recognize what you're talking about, and definitely.
I don't know if I know it, but I love this idea of life being big, and also, you meet people who go through it and they forget.
Yes,
and that's kind of strange.
My grandparents and their generation were World War II people. They survived, they were refugees from the Holocaust, or they survived the war in Germany, or they, whatever. And you wouldn't have said that they fell apart and put themselves back together again. Not all of them. They had, the suffering that they were dealing with was so extreme that they had just kind of built something around it. So, I mean, that's not obviously true of everyone, but it's definitely something.
I mean, I also am descendant, like my grandparents also survived the Holocaust, and you see some people in old age.
Yeah.
Friends, but not, it's maybe like 20%.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think my grandmother did, I think she was maybe in her like late 70s and saw like Schindler's List and was like, oh, yeah, okay.
It happened. I mean, there was probably that level of, it's not a chosen precipice. You're being pushed. And that's...
Well, and there are, I think, I mean, it's true that I'm very privileged in terms of the types of precipice I've had to face. They haven't been that bad. I think there are forms of suffering which can overwhelm a person. And I'd be very reluctant to judge someone for not taking it on.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree that when it comes to trauma, it's you just leave it up to that person and their complexities.
Exactly.
Figure out how to deal with it. My last question to all my guests, and I sometimes forget to ask, is, we talked to them about AI and I think our shared trust in people's intellectual dignity, that they all have it, and that's completely regardless of educational ranking and social status, whether they belong to some elite academic institution or not, whether they're religious or not, men, women, young, old. But one thing I'm really, really curious about here is, say it's 2030 and the world by now collectively understands something about people's intellectual lives. What is something that you know now that people you think are just kind of coming around to? What is your vision for 2030?
Okay, I don't normally think in 5-year plans, but I think that people have already begun to realize, if I think about 10 years ago, that was tech optimism.
Oh, yeah.
Like the internet has liberated us from human suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And people have now started to realize that it hasn't done that we need forms of discipline so that it serves us. So it's not about being against technology. It's about what's it for? It's for serving us. It's for serving human life. And I think we will see that grow. What it may be like, what I suspect, is that it's going to be a counterculture. So it's not going to be a mainstream, maybe. I would love it if everyone came to this realization. But we also haven't had a counterculture for like 20 years in the US, so far as I can see. So along with the tech optimism, there was kind of a crushing of, like a homogenizing of everything. And I think what we're getting back is a counterculture. And I'm expecting that's going to grow, and it will support institutions again. And I am optimistic. There are specific circumstances. I mean, I work in higher education. It's a I would call it a collapsing field. And I don't really know how it's going to be replaced. And sometimes I get really frightened. But I do feel confident that there will be institutions, because I see right now, I'm not a future predictor, but I see right now at St. John's, where I teach, the students, they love figuring things out for themselves. Like I have this class I met this morning. I can't get them to stop. Like we were reading this treatise by Pascal on the weight of the air. So Pascal made these arguments that the air actually has weight, which people didn't think about before that. And they're like inventing new kinds of siphon, and they're like doing all this. And I'm like, wait, I can't follow everything you're doing. Slow down and talk to me. You know, I'm getting irritated because they have so much energy that they're dedicating to figuring things out for themselves. So I see that. I see people pouring into Catherine Project, wanting to read books and talk about them with people, pouring in. Like, we don't have enough staff to handle all the people. And that's what I hear from everyone in your line of work, in intellect, or Agnes with night owls. Like, people are just hungry for it. So we just need to keep being attentive to that hunger and looking for ways to feed it. And that's what I see in the future.
That's the greatest hope. I mean, running Interact I've been doing it for over 7 years altogether, or maybe 8 years. Completely changed my view of humans. I was a little bit jaded, and I was definitely under the kind of threat of how the New York Times had seen the tech developments. And everything I built at the beginning was somehow self-defensive.
Yeah.
Against bullying, against toxic online. Then I realized, like, people are fine. Just like build a space where they can talk about Dostoevsky and the Tao of Pooh, and they'll be fine. You'll have a problem of having to kick people out after 7 hours because you need to go to the bathroom or eat or sleep. Just, guys, enough. I don't know how and people tell me who have children that it's not true that all children are addicted to their iPad. Like, no, you have books in the house and the kids will find them.
Yeah, that's right.
The problem is not having the inappropriate books on the lower shelves. That's the problem of my friends who are parents. It's not that the kids won't open the books.
Well, and let me say one last thing about this, because I think it's relevant to your theme, that for me it was different. I wasn't jaded when I started out, but I was sentimental. Yeah. So I think Thoughts and Thought is written under a guise of sentimentality. Yeah. It's like, I've heard these stories that everyone wants to learn, and I think it might be true. Now, I love that. And then the book comes out, and it turns out it's true, because all these people who I had only imagined in hope actually ended up materializing. Like, hope is very, very powerful, because it gives people permission to do things that they're otherwise afraid to do, or parts of themselves that they're afraid to express. So it's one of the reasons why, even though I'm actually in real life a negative person, cynical person by nature, like, I try never to communicate that in public, because I know now that the hope, the expression of hope, has so much benefit for people, to say that other people find it freeing. They can say, "Oh, it's true. I do really like reading, don't I?" You know, instead of being embarrassed or ashamed. Yeah. You know. So anyway, so I think
I see a rediscovery of some of these very normal elements of life. Right? Like, people tell me who are parents or who like to tend to their little gardens, that this used to be such a taboo because you had to be, a kind of person. And now I can say I love my kids in public. Or my husband. I'm attracted to my husband. That used to be a complete, you were an oppressed woman, and people seem to love this stuff. We're like, I am happy in church. And I think that's good. I don't want to force these things on people, obviously, but like, if you're deriving hope and joy from something, I want to live in a society where that's okay to say, and to find other people who also like those things and let them join you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for being here. This was a joy. And everybody read Lost in Thoughts.